newcomers, thank you for joining the Climate Reality Project. Just by way of introduction, my name is Wei-Tai Kwok, and I am one of the co-chairs of the policy action team of this chapter. The Climate Reality Project, as you may know, was founded by former Vice President Al Gore to have local climate activists pulled together to take urgent action on climate. And there are over 100 chapters around the country. And here in the San Francisco Bay Area, we have a 10-county chapter footprint with about 1,000 members. And we work on all sorts of climate activism together. And in particular, tonight's meeting is related to our policy action team, so taking policy action on climate. In this group, we are currently focused this year on addressing and targeting local governing bodies, meaning cities and counties, to pass greenhouse gas reducing legislation by a date certain. And our overall theme is to try to get cities and counties to pass legislation that would require no natural gas in new construction of buildings, to phase out natural gas, and instead to mandate all electric buildings. And therefore, that's why tonight we're very pleased to have as our topic a case study from the latest city in California to go all electric, and that's the city of San Carlos on the peninsula. And I'm very delighted that one of our own climate leaders, Kathleen Goforth, was involved in that effort and is going to share all the secrets to us today. And so with that, let me introduce our moderator for the evening, David Kunhardt, who was trained as a climate leader in Denver in 2017. He's a member of our policy action leadership team for the last 2 years. And he's also an elected official as the vice mayor of the town of Corte, Madera. I know David has had a career in the solar energy business before he became an elected official. And we asked him to lead up tonight so that we could hear, like, what's it like to be on the elected official side when people like Kathleen are there trying to twist your arm to do something like this. So I'm looking forward to hear the dynamics between the two of them. David, why don't you take it away?
Thank you very much, Wei-Tai. And, you know, in my case, I would welcome any one of you who is a climate hero to come forward with specific ideas, especially if you follow some of the lessons learned that Kathleen is going to put forward. I'm also going to make myself as small as possible in this presentation because she has some fabulous slides and a great story to tell. Kathleen Goforth is a retired EPA scientist and manager who volunteers with several organizations as an environmental educator and climate action advocate. Kathy, we share that, you and I. She holds a BS in science and environmental change from the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, and is a certified California naturalist. Kathleen attended Climate Reality's first global leadership training in July 2020. How many else on the call were on July 2020? Put up your hands. There we go. Leslie, Alden, and you've been mentors. She lives in San Carlos with her husband and one grown son who has bounced back to home, I think. Kathleen, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Actually, my son lives in Marin. He's up closer to you than he is to me.
Great.
Yeah. So thank you, everybody. Let me get my screen share going here. Make sure this works. It worked a few minutes ago. And then I will dive right in. Uh-oh, where'd it go? End of show. Well, that's not where we want to be. Let's try this again. Sorry about that. We will, oh dear. So much for our tech check, Wei-Tai. There we go. Now we're at the end. Okay.
Just go there and then just go up, up, up.
Yep. We're just going to go back. All right. So you've already seen what we're doing here. Okay.
No, we didn't see it.
You have to share your screen again. Go ahead and share the screen again.
Okay. So, oh, it's not sharing. Great. Wonderful. Well, hang on a second. Sorry about that. It all worked so beautifully a minute ago.
It'll work again.
Yeah.
You're among friends.
Who saw Doonesbury 2 Sundays ago with a family all trying to suffer through this? Oh, there we go. Now.
There we go. All right. Now you got it?
Excellent.
Okay. All right. Good. So thank you. Appreciate all the interest in San Carlos's REACH code success. The process of getting a REACH code adopted in San Carlos, oh dear, it's already moving on its own. That's cool. The process took about 2 years, and I'm going to try to condense all that into the next 30 minutes. So I am going to dive in. I guess my presentation is ready to go even faster than I am. So what I'm going to do is tell you very briefly just how I got involved in all this. And then I'm going to jump to the very end of the story and share with you the REACH code that was adopted. And then I'll back up and tell you how we got there. And I'm going to wrap it up at the end with some tips for anybody who might be embarking on an effort like this in their own city. So wow, this thing is just moving on its own here. As David mentioned, I used to work for the Environmental Protection Agency. I was a scientist and a manager for about 35 years. And I just retired a couple of years ago in March of 2019. And shortly after I retired, I got connected with the Citizens Climate Lobby and met a handful of people in our local climate lobby chapter who live in San Carlos. And I also had an opportunity, it was around June of 2019, to attend a workshop on reducing greenhouse gas emissions in San Mateo County. And there were a couple of speakers there who were talking about REACH codes. And I had never heard of REACH codes before. I had no idea what they were talking about. But the more I listened and learned, I thought, well, this sounds like a fantastic thing to be doing. I was really interested in what could be done at the local level, because mind you, I had been at EPA, where for the last 2 years of my career, we had been totally silenced on climate change. So I was very interested to hear what we could do. And, but I was really disappointed to hear that San Carlos was not pursuing this. And one of the speakers was from the Office of Sustainability, and she was talking about how the county and Peninsula Clean Energy, which is our community choice aggregation electric utility, had teamed up to try to encourage all the cities in San Mateo County to adopt REACH codes. And they had put together a model code, and they had done all the background research, and they put together a presentation that they were taking around to all the city councils. And they were even offering $10,000 to each city that would adopt, that would make a commitment to adopt REACH codes. But San Carlos had shown absolutely no interest in this. So I was talking with my new friends at the Climate Lobby, the folks in San Carlos, and we thought, well, maybe this is something we can get involved in, and we can try to get San Carlos to kind of step up to the plate here. So now I'm going to jump ahead and tell you what we ended up with. As I mentioned this, the county had developed a model code. And so by the time San Carlos actually got around to doing anything about this, there were multiple codes they could have chosen from. But they did decide to use the model that the county had put together. And we were very happy about that, because we thought that was really the best one. It was the most straightforward, didn't have a whole lot of exceptions in it. And it was really just like something they could plug and play. But of course they didn't. They made a few changes, some of which we like. So what the code says is that all newly constructed buildings and what I'm calling greater than 50% rebuilds must be all electric. Now, all REACH codes deal with the newly constructed buildings, but this more than 50% rebuilds was something that we really wanted to get into this. What that refers to is a reconstruction project where more than 50% of the foundation of the building, or more than 50% of the framing of the building, is being removed or altered in some way. And this was really important to us because, you know, not building new gas infrastructure is great, you know, let's not dig ourselves into a deeper hole, but we're not really going to be reducing methane emissions until we start getting rid of some of the existing infrastructure. So this was something that we really wanted to get into the ordinance, and we're very happy it is in there. Now, there are a number of exceptions, and this first one is a partial holdover from what the county had in its model ordinance. They include an exception for laboratories to have non-electric space heating or space conditioning, so heating and cooling. In the county's ordinance, that was the exception. They could have this exception without really having to show they needed it. We pushed back on this and did get San Carlos City Council to narrow it down a little bit and require that the laboratories provide third-party verification that electric is not cost-effective or feasible for them. So we thought that was a reasonable compromise. And there is a big biotech development that's coming into San Carlos. It's going to be probably the biggest thing to hit this town in a couple of decades. So laboratories were a big interest for our city council. The next exception is for restaurants. And this, I believe this exception was unchanged from what the county had included in its model. Restaurants can request a modification from the building official to have gas cooking appliances, but they have to show that they've got a business-related reason. You know, their specialty requires cooking with a flame, and they can't, you know, do it without electric. We didn't really push back on this one because it's not just an assumption that if you're a restaurant, you can have gas cooking. There is, you know, a little bit of a hoop that you have to jump through there. You've got to persuade the building official that this is something you really, really need. And we felt that was a reasonable compromise. This next one is one that we really didn't want to have in there. Single family residences can also have gas cooking appliances and fireplaces. This was not in the county's model. And the reason it wasn't in the county's model is because when the county had been developing its REACH code, several of us had gone and spoken at their meetings and persuaded them not to include this. But San Carlos did want to have an exception. And initially what it said was that any residential building could have gas cooking appliances and fireplaces. And we did push back on that. And we got them to narrow it down to just the single family residences. This next exception for exceptional or extraordinary circumstances was put in there at the insistence of one of our city council members. She had talked with a constituent who had a particular situation with a swimming pool that they needed to keep heated to a certain temperature because they had a disabled person in the family who needed this heated pool for therapy. And their contractor had told them there was no way to do that with electricity. We weren't entirely persuaded that that was accurate information, but it had really made an impression on this council member that there could be situations, you know, something really extraordinary that could put somebody in a bind, and she wanted there to be a way for these unusual circumstances to get an exception. So they did include this exceptional or extraordinary circumstances exception, but again, it's not an automatic. You've got to persuade the building official that there's really a need, that you just can't meet your unusual situation without this. And to make sure that the building official isn't, you know, being too hard on people, they included a process for appeals to the city council. And then lastly, there's an exception for attached accessory dwelling units. They are not required to be all electric unless they were developed as part of one of these more than 50% rebuilds. And if anybody takes advantage of any of these exceptions and does include gas in their building, they are required to pre-wire the building so that at some future date it can be fully electrified. So we were very happy with this. Oh, and also on the single family cooking, they did agree, the council did agree that they will revisit that exception because that was the one we really didn't want. And we had suggested that they include a sunset provision for it, and they weren't quite ready to do that, but they did agree to revisit it in about a year. So it took a while to get to this, but we were really happy with what we ended up with here. So now I'm going to tell you how we got there. This is the 2-year process condensed into one slide. The first that, as far as I know, the earliest that anybody was talking to our city council members about REACH codes was in around January of 2019, which I think is probably about when the state codes came out and the opportunity arose for cities to do this. And as I mentioned, the county and Peninsula Clean Energy were offering this presentation to the city councils, but there were also a couple of local activists who were meeting individually with some of our council members to talk to them about climate issues in general and including REACH codes. But they weren't really getting any traction on this. And so it wasn't until June that my fellow San Carlos climate lobby folks and I got involved. And we still couldn't get anything to happen until November 2019. The City Council finally agreed to have a study session. And that's where Peninsula Clean Energy came in and gave them the presentation about REACH codes. But they didn't take any action. It was another 10 months before the council directed the staff to actually go prepare a REACH code for us to vote on. So now we're at September of 2020. And it took about a month for the city staff to put together a proposal and bring it back to them. They didn't need a whole lot of time because, as I said, the work had mostly been done by the county. There was a model code available for them. So they just did their little tweaks to it, took it back to the council in October of 2020. And the council had a very convoluted discussion about it, and they came this close to adopting it, and then it crashed. The council member who had some concerns brought them up kind of at the very last minute, and they just failed to adopt it. But what they did was they directed the staff to go do some outreach, because one of the concerns that this one council member had was that the staff had never done any outreach to the community about this. We felt like, you know, we had demonstrated there was community support, but they hadn't really gone out and talked to the community about this in a broader sense. So they said, go do some outreach and revise the proposal, bring it back to us for reconsideration. So that happened, took about 3 months for that to happen. The council then saw the new version of the code in January. They made a few more modifications and voted and adopted it. And then it took about a month for the staff to incorporate those final modifications. They just brought it back to the council last night and voted to adopt it in its final form. So everything I'm telling you tonight is hot off the presses. So why did it take so long? Well, there's a number of reasons. First of all, as I said, in the beginning, the city manager and the staff were not really all that receptive to the county's and PCE's offer to give them a presentation. They really couldn't have cared less about this $10,000. I was surprised they'd want to give us some money, but they didn't think that was persuasive. And they just really weren't keen on pursuing this. You know, there was no push from the staff to do it. And we had a situation where the majority of our council members were brand new. We have a 5-member council and 3 members had just been elected in 2018. So January 19, when this is first, all the discussion about this is starting, we have 3 brand new council members. As far as I know, it was new for all of them to be in elected office. And, you know, they're kind of just finding their footing as council members, and they were very reliant on the city manager to give them guidance about what they should be focusing on. And so I think, you know, that sort of dependency there made them a little reluctant to push back. And so, you know, you're brand new, your city manager is telling you, no, this is not an important issue, don't worry about it, the state's going to deal with this later. So, you know, they just weren't inclined to push.
Kathy, Jackie asks if San Carlos previously had a climate emergency resolution passed.
No, I don't think so. The county had passed one. I don't think there was one in San Carlos. The Citizens Climate Lobby folks that I was working with had gotten the city council to adopt a resolution supporting the national climate legislation, the Carbon Fee and Dividend Act that Citizens Climate Lobby supports. So that was one of the reasons we decided to work on this, because they just had that success with the city council, and we're looking for something else that they could do to build on that success. So we decided to try the REACH codes. I don't think there's ever been a climate emergency declaration, but there's somebody else on this call who might actually know the answer. We can ask her at the end. Another thing that I can't say for sure that this was a factor, but it occurred to me that the couple of people that I know of who started talking to our council members pretty early in 2019 about climate issues and REACH codes were not San Carlos residents. One of them lived just outside the city limits. She'd worked on San Carlos issues before, but she didn't live in the city. She wasn't a constituent. And the other was a Sierra Club person who lives in Belmont. So, you know, council members have a lot of people asking them to do things, and they're probably a little bit more inclined to pay attention to what their constituents are asking. So that may have been a factor. We also heard quite a bit that the council members were really concerned about overburdening the staff. Granted, doing the REACH code we didn't think that was going to be a big burden because so much of the work had been done by the county, but it was something that was very much on the minds of our council members. And I think, you know, we don't have any climate deniers on our council. They all recognize that, you know, we're in a climate crisis. But I think, and this is just my perception from talking with some of them, I didn't get the sense that they really fully appreciated the urgency of the situation. And they didn't really think that they had a role to play in dealing with it. It was, you know, a big issue, very complicated, kind of out there for somebody else. You know, somebody's got to do something, but didn't think it was them. And we had one council member, one of the more experienced council members, who was absolutely adamantly opposed to the local government doing anything. Whoa, this thing is really working all by itself here. And I actually got into a little bit of an email exchange with this individual because he was pushing back on us really hard. And at one point, actually, I'll use his words, actually accused us of trying to subvert and overthrow the state's process by asking the local government to do something about climate change. He just did not think this was their role. And then lastly, we're having a pandemic. You know, that kind of slowed some things down. So there were a lot of things at work that made this not a speedy process. So what did we do? Well, first of all, we educate ourselves. We needed to know what we were talking about so we could be useful resources for our city council members. So we, you know, attended a lot of webinars and read reports and talked to experts and made sure we knew what we were talking about. We sent a lot of emails to our city council members, and we tried to be strategic about this and also kind of opportunistic about it. Anytime we heard that another city had adopted REACH codes, we'd send them a message. Hey, just want to make sure you know that Redwood City just adopted a REACH code. We'd send, I remember sending a couple of them a YouTube video that I'd found on induction stoves because we had been talking to them about induction. We sent them, you know, the latest reports on indoor air quality from gas combustion, that sort of thing. And we'd use these as opportunities to, we were trying to educate our city council members, and then also, you know, this would be an opportunity to kind of just give them a little nudge to you know, going to put that on the agenda soon, you know, just keep the issue in front of them and help them feel more informed about it. We met with city council members on an individual basis. We also set up a meeting for one of our council members with a building electrification expert, somebody that we had talked to who had helped us feel like we were up to speed when we had a council member who was starting to show some interest, but was feeling concerned because she didn't really know, you know, who to talk to about it. We just got her on Zoom with this guy and let her ask him questions. And I think it helped her feel more confident. And it also helped her, I think, feel like she could count on us because this guy was backing up a lot of what we said, and he had a lot more, you know, expertise behind it. We also met with our city manager, and that was kind of interesting because we'd been meeting with the council members, and they were telling us, well, gee, you know, I'm open to this, but the city manager tells us this is not a, you know, really important thing for us to be focusing on. And then we met with the city manager, and he said, well, you know, we'll do whatever the council tells us to do, but you know, they're not really interested in this issue. So, you know, there was a little bit of finger pointing going on here. We also made comments at city council meetings. If there was anything related to REACH codes on the agenda, we were there to talk, to make public comments. And if it wasn't on the agenda and we thought that something should be on the agenda, we would go, particularly when they were doing like their little planning retreats. A couple times a year, the city council members have these little mini retreats to plan what they're gonna prioritize. And we would go and say, we really think you ought to be working on REACH codes. We, in addition to sending our own individual messages, we collaborated with a couple of local organizations. The Fossil Free Buildings Silicon Valley group helped us out with preparing comment letters that we then circulated around to anybody we thought might be interested, to get lots of people to sign on and send comments to the City Council. And I've got links to a couple of those letters at the end if you want to see how we did that. We got 36 people, I think, to sign on to the first one. We networked with anybody we could find who was interested. Sierra Club is doing a lot of work on this. They were very helpful. Fossil Free Buildings Silicon Valley campaign. The Building Decarbonization Coalition was a great resource for us. These are people who work in this field, architects and developers and people with lots of expertise. So they were a terrific resource. And then, you know, talk to our friends and colleagues in Citizens Climate Lobby, climate reality people, neighbors, friends. I recruited somebody from a Zoom webinar or a Meet the Candidate event. I was on there and somebody asked a question of the candidate about reach codes. And I thought, wait a minute, that's my line, you know? And so I quick sent a chat to that person and you know, private chat and said, hey, I'm working on this. You want to join us? And turned out she was an architect. She worked on building electrification. So she became a great resource for us. Anywhere we could find support, we'd kind of try to pull people into our team. One of the most ambitious things we did was we put together a Q&A document on building electrification and reach codes. And this was when the council had sent the staff to go do some outreach. What the staff decided to do was post a survey on the city's website. They have this standard Shape San Carlos survey that they do when they want to get public input. And they put up this thing saying, you know, we're thinking about doing these reach codes, and it had, you know, a tiny bit of information, but we were concerned that, you know, a lot of people weren't going to have any background in this, and they were either going to get a lot of negative comments, or people weren't going to know what it was about and they wouldn't respond at all. And we really wanted the city to get the sense that the community was supporting this. So we whipped up a question and answer document, put a little nice cover message on it, and sent that around to everybody we could think of who might be supportive, and said, please read these questions and answers and then go fill out this survey. And we gave them the link. And I think about 86 people responded to the survey, which was 3 to 4 times the number that normally will respond to these things. So I think we helped them get a little bit more feedback. And, it was about half and half, people supporting and people not so supportive. And the ones who were not so supportive, not surprisingly, their responses reflected a number of misconceptions. So I'm going to assume that those are the people who didn't see our question and answer document. Another thing that was happening while this was going on was City of San Carlos is in the process of updating its climate mitigation and action plan. And so they started hosting community workshops to get input on to what should be in this plan. Sierra Club is monitoring these updates. I think all the cities have to update their plans periodically. And so Sierra Club is working on this, and we collaborated with them in advance. And we managed to get so many people to go to the first workshop. When they separate everybody into breakout groups, we had 2 to 4 people who were in our little reach code supporting group in each breakout group. And so when the breakouts all got back together to report out on what everybody thought the priorities were, reach codes were at the top of the list. So we were pretty proud of ourselves for that one.
That's brilliant. You're not only preparing the questions and the answers, but also all the influencers. Kathleen Goforth from San Anselmo asks, who was the electrical expert that you mentioned that you brought in for one of the council members, please?
Oh, we connected with Sean Armstrong at Redwood Energy. It's a affordable housing electrification developer up in Arcata. And his company has prepared several handbooks on electrification. They just came out with a new one today on how to retrofit your home all electric, and how to do it on a budget too.
What's the name of his group again?
Redwood Energy.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I think I've got a link to his site at the end of this. And then the last thing I want to mention that we did was we showed up in lots of places where we thought we might you know, our council members would be present. So one of our council members was doing a series of virtual coffees. She started doing this after the pandemic started, just to kind of provide information to the community. So I just started showing up to all of those virtual coffees. And I attended a Peninsula Clean Energy Board meeting because that council member is our representative on the board. Meet the candidate events, anything that was hosted by our council members or where we thought they might be present, we would go and just be a presence there. It was a way of giving ourselves some visibility. Sometimes it was an opportunity to kind of interject a question about reach codes or electrification or the climate in general or something. But it helped make that connection, show them we were there, that we were, you know, we were watching what they were doing, and we were also, you know, really making an effort to be engaged in the things that they were concerned about as well. So what had the most influence? Well, two things that I know had a lot of influence were teenagers. A couple of our council members have teenage children, and they confided in us that their teenagers had actually been kind of on their case to do something about the climate, and had been telling them, you know, that they should use their position on the council to do something. And one of them specifically said, what do you mean you didn't vote for the reach codes? So that was very helpful. Never underestimate the voices of young people. Another thing that kind of sadly was influential was the wildfires. I mentioned earlier that there was one council member who was really pushing back on us and saying, you know, we shouldn't be taking over something that, you know, should be handled at the state level. And he just did not want to talk to us about reach codes. He ended up being the one to introduce the motion to adopt the reach code. And afterwards, I, you know, thank you. You know, that was great. Do you mind telling me what changed your mind? And he said the wildfires made a really big impression on him. And then a couple other things that I would like to think made, you know, had some influence, and I think they did, was the active engagement of San Carlos residents. As I mentioned in the beginning, the first few months, the people who were talking to our council members were not their constituents. But once we got kind of a core group of San Carlos residents talking to them and showing up repeatedly at the meetings, you know, I think that started getting their attention. And, you know, obviously they're going to want to hear what their constituents have to say more than somebody from another town or just an environmental group. And then just the fact that we maintained a consistent presence. We just kept showing up, and we kept popping up in places where they might not have even expected us to be. And we had a consistent message, and we had a very well-supported message. We knew what we were talking about, and we could back it up. So some tips if you're planning to do this yourself. Whoops.
Yeah, additional question, Kathy, is David and Robin Mahler from Larkspur, who are instrumental in both an EV squad and also a building electrification squad, want to know how many people in your core team. It sounds as though this is dozens of people worth of activity, but how many people in your core team were engaged in all these things?
We had a huge group. There were 3 of us that were kind of the ringleaders, and
but you had 9 in that last photograph.
Yeah, so that photo actually was taken when a bunch of us had gone to the San Mateo County supervisors. This was before the reach code really got going, reach code process got going in San Carlos, that we were waiting for San Carlos to schedule something. And in the meantime, the county was working on its reach code for the unincorporated areas. And we had gone to speak there when they did their climate emergency declaration, and then again when they were doing their reach codes. And a lot of the same people who are in that photo were also involved in our San Carlos effort. But there were really 3 people who were like I say, the ringleaders. It was Ellen Dooley and Suzanne Emerson and I were kind of the core, and then a lot of other people helped us out and, you know, showed up for meetings, signed the letters, sent emails. So I think pretty much everybody in that photo was involved, plus a few other people. But there were long stretches where it was just Ellen and Suzanne and me, emailing ourselves back and forth and talking to our council members. And then when something looked like it was going to happen, we had other people that we could count on, who jumped in. So some lessons learned: be persistent. It's not a straightforward process. You gotta just hang in there. And there's a fine line between being persistent and being a pest. And you gotta figure out where that line is with your council members. But just stick with it and communicate strategically. Like I mentioned earlier, we were looking for opportunities to send them a message, looking for opportunities to talk to them, to educate them. Try different things. What works with one council member isn't necessarily going to be persuasive for another one. Team up. It is a whole lot more fun if you've got somebody else to work with. And honestly, having Ellen and Suzanne was critical for keeping me involved in this, because there were times when I was just so frustrated that I just wanted to sort of chuck it and walk away. But then I'd get a message from one of them with a brand new idea of something we could try, and we'd be off to the races again. And also, what I think one of the things that was great for us was we kind of complemented each other's areas of expertise. Suzanne can pull statistics out of her head, at the drop of a hat, and is full of, knowledge of the history of working with our council, and just really gets into the technical details. And Ellen is just fantastic at making the connections with people and making the council members feel good about what they were doing, and writing these lovely emails to get them engaged in it. And I'm kind of the policy wonk, so we kind of covered all the bases. And then we brought in architects and developers, anybody we could find with some other expertise to kind of fill in the gaps for us. Another thing to keep in mind is your city council members have a lot on their mind. So you got to find out what they care about. And in our case, big thing was this huge biotech development that's coming in. That was one of the things that prompted one council member to actually reach out to us after we'd been sending her stuff for months and months and months. And she finally said, "Can we talk?" And she was trying to figure out something that she could do before this biotech development came in. I don't know what's going on with this thing. So we talked with her about that. Another thing that they were interested in, all of our council members are interested in, is affordable housing is a big, big issue for them. And there's kind of this knee-jerk reaction that, building electrification, that's going to make it harder for them to develop affordable housing. And we were able to say, no, it's actually cheaper to build affordable housing without installing all this natural gas infrastructure. That's where, a lot of the developers are going. So, being able to make that connection to something that the council members were really, really focused on was very helpful. And then just, got to establish yourself as a trusted source. Make sure you know what you're talking about. And if you don't know the answer to something they ask you, for heaven's sakes, admit it, but then go try and find the answer and get back to them so they know that you're somebody, that they can count on. I also put a note in here that you got to recognize they're not always reading all the details of the ordinances. A lot of these people, people on the council might have a day job, so they don't have all day to sit around reading every little detail of the ordinance. And we had a situation once where we were commenting on, exception number 2 of the ordinance, and they had only read the staff report, and the staff had some other list in there. And so they were looking at number 2 on the staff report. They couldn't figure out what we were talking about. Well, because we were diving into the details of the ordinance itself. Your city council members want to know that their constituents are behind them. They don't want to go stick their necks out if, the community is going to then come back and chop their heads off. So it's important to show that there is support. And so, all those calls and emails and showing up at the council meetings to say, look, the community is going to be behind you. We'll back you up. We got your back if you do this. Request those one-on-one meetings, get to know them. I put a note in there about respect the Brown Act. I'm not an expert on the Brown Act, but I do know that I think you can't have, and David, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you can't have a majority of council members talking to each other outside of a public meeting. Well, for us, that means more than 2 council members can't talk to each other. And you can't tell one council member what another council member told you about the topic, because then you're kind of putting them in a compromising situation. Yeah. So just be careful about that when you're doing these meetings. And for heaven's sakes, when they do what you're looking for them to do, you know, recognize them for it. Send thank you notes. You know, give them a pat on the back, because it's not easy being a council member. You know, you got people asking you for all kinds of things all the time, and never make everybody happy. So let them know when they've taken a step in the right direction.
Kathy, how important is it for people who do not consider themselves to be experts to be there and present and reminder and be a face for them to recognize?
You know, you don't have to be an expert. I think you need to be knowledgeable. Don't go saying things that you can't back up, but don't try to speak beyond the knowledge that you have. If you don't have the details, then, you know, go find somebody who does, or, you know, but admit you don't know something. But you probably know more than you think you do.
But you've already said you want to be a trusted source.
You want to be a trusted source. And being a trusted source doesn't mean that you have all the answers. If anything, it means that, you know, they know that you're not going to try to snow them if you don't know the answers. My last tip is don't be afraid to ask for what you really want. We did that with the county when it was working on its REACH code ordinance. They were the presentation that the county had gotten from its staff did not recommend that they require, it was recommending that they allow an exception for cooking, because they said, oh, people are so culturally attached to their stoves, we just don't even want to touch that. And I thought, you know, we're facing an existential planetary crisis here. I'm as attached to my gas stove as anybody, but I think I can adjust. So I got up and said that at the supervisors meeting, and I thought they were going to laugh me out of the room. And instead they said, you know, I said, you know, there's this thing called induction stoves. They're, you know, pretty cool. And they said, oh, tell us about that, you know, and they ended up not including that exception. Now that was the county. The city did put that in. But with the city, we said, you know, we'd really like this to apply to rebuilds, not just new construction. And they did. So, you know, ask. And if you don't get what you asked for, you've at least planted a seed, you know, and maybe it'll take root another time, or maybe you've inspired somebody else who can go make it happen. So don't be afraid to ask.
One more question from the Mahler household is, when you're having your one-on-one meetings, and you were spot on in what you said, you can't ever engage, if you have 5 members on the whole council, you can't ever engage with more than 2 council members at once. But when you had one-on-one meetings, was it more effective to have just 1 or 2 of you, or 3 or 4 or 5 of you with 1 council member?
I was only involved with 1 council member at a time. And there were other people who did more of those individual meetings than I did. I think I was only in, you know, 1 or 2 of those. And we had, it was Ellen and I met with one of our council members one time on Zoom. But, you know, we felt it was best to just have a couple of us. I honestly don't know what's going on with this thing. We didn't want to look like we were ganging up on her. And, but I think in pretty much every case, it was just 1 council person at a time. Because, you know, we're trying to build that personal connection with them. What I've got up here now are some common arguments, or I do have it up there. Jeez. If you're going to work on REACH codes, you've got to be prepared for these arguments. These are the things that we heard most often. And I just off the top of my head was able to make this list in about 1.5 minutes because we heard these things all over and over again. And I can come back to this later when we're doing questions if people want to talk about more, especially since my presentation seems to want to keep moving.
Well, but you're essentially at your end point.
I am at the end.
This is really, really informative, and I find it to be just terrific myself, culturally and every other way. I'm very active with Citizens Climate Lobby, and my my strong belief is that when you go into a public setting, you have to be kind and polite and respectful. Because you can't go in and say, you're an idiot, you have to do so, because you will just be written off and you will never be a trusted resource. You have to thank them. You have to reach in and see who they are and thank them, and then go about your business and be clear.
Just one thing I wanted to point out on this slide that keeps disappearing here. Most of these links are to various organizations that are good resources just to get up to speed on reach codes and electrification. And I think, let's see, the second one is Redwood Energy. That's the company that I mentioned earlier that's where Sean Armstrong is one of the principals. He's the one we connected our council member with. Down at the bottom of the list, I've got links to a couple of those sign-on letters that we prepared. So if you want to take a look at those, you can access those letters. And all of our city council, or most of our city council meetings are videotaped. So if you want to see what it's like to go, make comments at a city council meeting, you can Google San Carlos City Council and get the videos and see how that goes.
Kathy, on your penultimate slide, the one before this, the resources, do you have concise answers to those big questions that come up as objections? Do you feel that you have good answers for each of those?
I can give you a quick answer to most of them. Yeah. You want me to run through them?
Put your hands up. Do you want her to run through? Yes. Very, very, that would be great. That would be great.
Before my slide disappears again. I wonder if there's a way I could lock
that. Was Marilyn Farley asked that question, and I think Harriet Harvey wants to hear as well.
Harriet knows the answers. Harriet helped me figure out the answer. Harriet was my mentor in climate reality training. So let's see, the state will require this in a few years. We don't want to get ahead of the state. Well, there's all sorts of reasons why we shouldn't be waiting for the state. First of all, we don't know for sure what the state is going to require. And we're in a crisis, and every new bit of natural gas infrastructure that's installed is going to be leaking methane from the moment it's installed. And methane is one of the most powerful greenhouse gases. So, we don't have time to waste. We can't wait, because there's a lot of emissions that will be released while we're waiting for the state to require this. The grid can't handle this. We're already having power outages. Well, we talked to people at PCE and they said, yeah, we've run the calculations. We got the capacity for this. That's not an issue. That question came up when I was on a call, and I had a PCE person there, and I just turned it over to him, and he said, no, we can handle it. It's a small fraction of their load.
California frequently has a surplus of energy during the solar day, the middle of the solar day.
Yeah.
Not in the evening. It's a different issue there, but yeah.
Yeah. So combining with solar, rooftop solar and having battery storage, that sort of thing, that's going to be the key. People would say, well, yeah, but electrification isn't going to work if you have, if your electricity is coming from fossil fuels. Well, it's not here. Peninsula Clean Energy is providing us with 100% greenhouse gas free electricity. And by 2025, it's going to be fully from renewable sources. So that's a non-issue here. Now, in other parts of the country, that is an issue. But even in those cases, there have been studies showing that the emissions are less from electrifying, even if you're getting your electricity from fossil fuels. The greenhouse gas emissions are lower than they would be if you were just using, gas combustion in your home. People love their gas stoves. Nobody wants to cook electric. Well, I dealt with that one with the county folks. I think people need to know about induction. It's cleaner. It's easier to keep, clean up after you've cooked. It's safer, especially if you have little kids. There's no fumes in the house. It's healthier. There have been studies showing that there's a higher incidence of asthma in homes where they do cook with gas. There's all kinds of responses to that question. I'm really sorry about these slides. I don't know what's going on with my computer.
Just push the escape key and it will, yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Kathy, I want to provide an additional answer to whether to go for the state or for local. I think we've got to go both, and in part, the answer is provided by something I heard on NPR last night. The American Gas Association, AGA, is very aware that this is coming, and so they're beginning to put on a major push. And what they're doing, because they don't have endless staff, and so what they're doing is focusing on state legislatures, and they're going to try to get state legislatures to not allow this sort of change in any of the jurisdictions in any state.
Yes.
So unfortunately, we need to show the state of California that it's possible and that people can be behind it and support this, which is something that another person on the chat mentioned, as well as going straight to the state and saying, hey, let's resolve this in favor of clean air.
That's a very good point. Yeah.
Keep going. Keep going.
More questions here. Let's see. What else do we have? Gas is cheaper than electricity. Well, not for long. It's expected that gas prices are going to start rising a whole lot faster than electricity prices. The affordable housing. This will make it harder or more expensive to construct affordable housing. Well, that one was debunked pretty early. We've talked with affordable housing developers, and they said, no, actually, we build all electric. One developer said, we were actually able to include an additional unit in one of our developments, just with the money that we saved from not installing natural gas infrastructure. Or they were able to install, to provide more amenities in the housing. So that argument just doesn't hold up. It's actually easier for them. How could it be harder and more expensive when you're not putting in all this pipeline stuff? It's less work. Yeah. Adopting REACH codes, it's too complicated. We kept hearing that, this REACH code thing is just so complicated. Well, no, most of the work had already been done for them. And that was kind of proven when our council finally did tell the staff to, go bring us a REACH code, develop something. Well, they were able to do it in less than a month because they had to just go pick up the model that the county had already prepared for them. All the background documentation had already been done. So, it isn't rocket science.
Okay. Kathy, I'm going to interrupt again because Wei-Tai is about to drop the hammer on us if we don't finish up. But this has just been absolutely fabulous. And what I wanted to ask is if you can make this set of slides, particularly these last things on the lessons learned, available to everybody on this call. Is there a way to do that?
I have no idea. I'm going to rely on Wei-Tai.
Yeah. So what we'll do is Kathy can email me a copy, and then we'll post it on our website under this event. So climaterealitybayarea.org/events. You'll see this event as a past event. When you click on it, we'll have a video replay of the event, and we'll embed the PowerPoint as a downloadable from that point there.
Excellent.
That was all too complicated. I just put the email address of our chapter in the chat.
Okay. Now, I also want to just boost something that you said, Kathy, in the description of when you sort of got the furthest in the conversation with your council. And I want to reinforce that point very much. And that is the most important times and ways to get a brand new conversation that is a little unfamiliar to a council discussed is in a workshop or in a planning meeting, because if it's in a regularly agendized meeting, there's always the question, and the town council, that is the town attorney, will always be saying, are you within the four edges of the published agenda? You've gone beyond that. Stop. You can't do that. You can't have this conversation. But if you're having an open workshop on a new topic, that is an excellent place to do it. And for sure, a way to get it on a future agenda of any town council is to go to their planning meeting. And for our council, to me, that was the secret weapon. Nobody comes to those planning meetings except for one or two people. And those generally once a year, early in the year planning sessions is what sets the agenda for the town manager and for everybody in the staff going forward for a year. So absolutely jump into those planning sessions.
Yeah, our council does those twice a year, and we made a point of showing up at those.
Several people have said that this is really inspirational and a fabulous meeting and a great presentation and loved it. That's all you, Kathy. Thank you. Thank you. Several people have said things like that. Any other final compliments for Ms. Goforth here? Put your physical hand up if you want to say something. There you go, Robin. Fingers. Yes, Alan. Very good. Excellent. Really, Kathleen, I know from doing a little bit of work with you that you put many, many hours into this, and it took you even more hours to make it briefer and shorter and more punchy. And that is really inspirational and very, very useful. I hope everybody has gained from this as I have. Thank you very, very much. Appreciate it. Thank you, Wei Tai.
Yeah, what I'd like to propose is that we'll adjourn in 60 seconds. But if Kathy has a little bit more time, because there's so many questions from the audience, that we'll go into optional bonus time, just maybe for 10 more minutes, if anybody wants to stay and did not get their question answered by Kathy. Kathy, would you be able to stay on for 10 more minutes?
I'm free to stick around. So if anybody has more questions, I'm happy to do that.
We'll keep Kathy on for anybody who would like to stay on, but otherwise, for some of the upcoming events we have tomorrow for Black History Month, we have the Vice Chancellor from UC Davis, Renata Tull, as our guest speaker at 7 o'clock. For those interested, sign up at our chapter website and join us. And next Friday, we're going to do the very first time, we're going to have a Friday get together, which is a quasi-social. We have a very entertaining speaker, David Pogue, the tech writer from Macworld and New York Times. And he's going to talk to us not about climate mitigation, but adaptation. And he'll be presenting from 6 to 7:30 March 5th on a Friday. So come join us for that evening as well. And with that, we will adjourn for the formal session, and anybody who'd like to stay on, we'll keep peppering Kathy with more questions. So thank you very much, and have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night.
For anybody who's sticking around, I'm just gonna, oh, she might have left.
Jackie Garcia asks, what about opposition from builders or homeowners crying about their chef gas stoves?
You know, we were really lucky compared to what I've heard happened in other cities. We never really faced any organized opposition, or even any disorganized opposition.
And the restaurant community did? The restaurant
we
community
never heard a peep from them. Frankly, the biggest opposition we had was just in the city managers, you know, the city staff were just not interested in this until the council did say, you know, go do this. And then they got on it. And I think, you know, they did a good job. It took a few rounds of discussion to, you know, get it to what we ended up with, and, you know, get something that we were reasonably happy with. But
I wasn't willing to put in an induction cooktop until a friend who is an excellent cook said, "Oh, this is the easiest. It heats up faster. It cools down faster. You can control the temperature better. It never stinks. It is my smoke detector goes off much less than with gas events."
So actually, you know, a couple of successes on the induction stove. When I first got up at the San Mateo County supervisors meeting and said my little piece about, you know, I don't think you need an exception for cooking stoves. Induction stoves are great. I had never cooked on an induction stove myself. I had just read about them. But later on, I thought, you know, if I'm going to be talking about this, I should learn, you know, a little more firsthand. So I actually did borrow one and you know, got some practice with it. But when I said that to the county supervisors, one of the supervisors said, "Oh, I've got an induction stove. I'll cook dinner for everybody. You can see how great it is." And then one of our, what I think is one of our great successes with our city council was this one council member that we worked with quite a bit, eventually borrowed one of those little cooktop units herself from Suzanne, one of the other people I was working with, and then got an induction stove for Christmas. So, you know, she went in the space of 6 months from, you know, talking to us and saying, "I don't understand what this is all about. Can you educate me?" to, you know, "I got an induction stove for Christmas." So that was a nice little transformation and evolution kind of in her thinking on this.
Now, Leslie Alden, also from Corte Madera and on the Policy Action Leadership Team, asks, what percentage of your housing stock and single family homes actually have greater than 50% rehab? And I'm going to add to that question a little bit of kind of a warning sign. There are a lot of things that many of our building codes kick in when you do a 50% or more of value. One of them is sprinklers. One of them is, you know, sometimes new electric service, a variety of things for fire protection. And so builders and people are quite aware that once you go past that threshold, boom, you're into a whole new territory. Right. And so they avoid it. They will do a 48% renovation, or they'll really try to cheat the number down. Do you have any sense of how many of the renovations in your community?
I do not have any statistics on that. I can only tell you that in my immediate neighborhood, it seems like every other house is being rebuilt. Now, whether they're at 48% or 52%, I don't know, but there's an awful lot of homes being torn down and completely rebuilt. So to me, it seems like there's a lot going on. Some of the council members were saying, it's only a few, every year. I mean, well, maybe in your neighborhood, but in mine, there's a lot happening. Before I go on to any other questions, I just want to introduce, if she's still there, Ellen Dooley.
Yes.
There she is. Okay. This is one of my partners in crime on the project here.
Applause, applause.
I actually saw Ellen, and I was going to ask her if she wanted to correct anything that you said.
Yeah. I might regret this.
You need to correct Kathy. She's on top of everything.
Yeah.
Really going.
This is why I like working with Ellen. I told you, we keep each other's spirits up.
And thank you, Ellen. Thank you very much for being part of that dynamic duo, or
yes.
Fantastic Four, or however many you were.
Yeah, thanks.
I think Ellen is also the same Ellen who's very heroically active in Citizens Climate Lobby's fundraising. Is that true?
Yes, she
that
is.
would be me. Yeah.
All right. I recognize your hair.
All right.
Any other questions from any other folks?
Yeah, just raise your hand, and you don't have to type it in the chat at this point. We'll just, David, maybe you can call on people.
Well, one of the, Leslie asked, again, Leslie Alden, what about rentals and multi-unit buildings? Were they much of a factor of the discussion for you, other than, as you've mentioned, the affordable housing developments?
Well, that did come up in the discussion of the exemption for gas cooking and fireplaces, because initially what our city staff proposed was to just exempt residential cooking and fireplaces. You could have gas cooking and fireplaces. And the council members spent quite a bit of time discussing that, and eventually decided to, because we were pushing back on it, they did narrow it down to just the single family homes. So they are requiring multifamily units to be all electric. And they had a big discussion about, okay, well, how do we exactly define multifamily? Is it, do duplexes count? And I'm trying to remember now exactly what they ended up with. I think if it's anything more than a single family, it's considered multifamily, and it is required to be electric.
Did I see David Muller put his hand up, or was that scratching of the
actually, David, my hand was not up, but I would like to have it up. So I have a question. I was very interested in that concept of attending a council's planning or workshop sessions. And I was wondering how you find out when those are scheduled, and are they always open to the public? So if you want to go in and bring up a subject, gee, we'd really like to talk more about this. How do you make that happen? How do you find out when they happen, and how do you make that happen?
Well, our council meets every 2 weeks, and their agendas are always posted on the city's website. So you just Google San Carlos City Council, and it pops up with there's a tab to click on for agendas and agenda packets. And so they've got all the past meetings on there, and they've got the upcoming meetings listed on there. So you can see when they are planning to have a meeting. And, the regular meetings are on Monday nights, but then every now and then they'll do a special meeting, and it might be on a different night of the week. And I can't remember now if the planning sessions were just like a regular meeting time, but they designated it as the planning thing, or if they actually did it on a different night. But it's all listed there on their schedule.
My answer would be to ask the city clerk, town clerk, or city manager, town manager, when they have their annual. Typically it's no more frequent than annual planning meeting. a workshop can be conducted on any subject. So if they have a subject of wildfire prevention or a subject of sea level rise or a subject of any subject, you could conduct that as long as it is publicly announced and really wide open. But I would ask the staff leaders, when do you expect to have your next planning session? And then you just arrive. It is a public meeting, and you do get to listen, and you get to that open time. You generally don't always get an opportunity to comment on light items and say yes, no, because you're not a member of the council. But you can, depending on how many and how busy, you can be pretty influential, especially as somebody as substantive as you, David Muller.
Yeah, so our council, and I didn't know about any of this until I got involved in this, but they apparently do these planning retreats twice a year. So, and they do it in 2 sessions. They got a little mini retreat where they kind of brainstorm the things that they want to talk about in the retreat. And then they have the retreat where they actually talk about stuff. There were a number of times where they were discussing whether they wanted to discussing something at a later meeting. I mean, it kind of, blows your mind sometimes, but they would have a mini retreat, come up with their list in December, and then they actually had the retreat in January. And then they did another mini retreat in August, I think it was. And then follow up with, okay, these are the things we decided we talk about, and they kind of decide what their priorities are going to be for the next 6 months to a year.
And then COVID hits.
And then COVID hits and everything goes out the window. Yeah.
David, I think Marshall has his hand up.
I do. Hi, I'm from Belmont. This was an absolutely terrific presentation. Every part of it, the tips, etc. And I'm embarrassed to say that I don't know whether Belmont has passed a
you have not.
REACH code. I didn't think so. I was just going to Google it after the meeting, but I was quite surprised that the exception for fireplaces and stoves for new building is given an exception, but certainly pleased that at least they have to pre-wire.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm wondering whether you heard of any data that says that other places that have the exemptions have shown that they don't take the exemption because it's expensive.
I don't know the answer to that. Before I forget though, Marshall, I want to tell you there are some other people I've met who are, and we've got someone in our policy action squad who lives in Belmont and was interested in working on trying to get Belmont to do something. So if you want to work on REACH codes, I can put you in touch with somebody.
Oh, I definitely do.
Okay.
I'm working in conservation and environment with other organizations. So please have that person get my contact, and I'm happy to do it. Okay.
And then let's see, your question was, do people actually take advantage of the exemption? I don't know what has happened in other cities. I am hoping that, since single family homes are required under the ordinance that we've got, single family homes are going to be required to have electric space heating, electric water heating, electric dryers. Everything is going to have to be electric except the gas, the stoves and the fireplaces. And I'm kind of hoping that, if somebody's building from scratch or doing such a huge remodel, that they're putting in all this other electric stuff that, maybe they'll think twice about whether they want to go to the extra expense of installing gas infrastructure just to have a gas stove. And especially if we can get some public education going. And that was something that we also were pushing our council on. And they did agree that they were going to do some public education. Now, we haven't seen a plan for this yet, but I think it's going to be really, really important to educate the public about the alternatives so that when somebody is building a new house or doing one of these models, they're aware of the alternatives. And, you know, if they've had a chance to check out one of these little countertop induction units, then they'll know, yeah, that's kind of cool. You know, I'm not going to spend all the extra money to get a gas line put into my house if, you know, the only thing I'd be using it for is the stove. You know, that's my hope.
Right. Well, you know, my girlfriend has an induction stove, and it's totally awesome.
Yeah.
But it's surprising that San Carlos would make the exemption for fireplaces in this area that traps all the pollution. One house has a fireplace on and it pollutes the whole valley.
Yeah, I almost want to say, don't get me started on the fireplaces.
Oh yeah,
to me, that's,
yeah.
You know, when I first saw that in there, I thought that is, you know, of all the things to make an exception for, it's like the least essential, most, you know, there's no reason.
But wouldn't you agree that for the few days a winter when somebody wants a fire burning, that it would be better to be gas than to be wood, because woods have all the particulates and all of the other negatives that go out into the environment?
And gas releases a lot of particulates and toxic chemicals too. So I don't know about, you know, how they compare. What I do know is that I learned this from Sean at Redwood Energy, that there are actually water vapor fireplaces. They look like fire, but it's actually just water vapor.
Electric. There are electric fireplaces that are looking better and better, and they use, like in my case, I have LED electric, but some of them use water vapor to look like the steam. So they're very compelling.
So you know, if you really want to have that ambiance in your house, then you know there are alternatives that aren't going to pollute at all. And I mean, I love sitting in front of a fireplace. I'm the master fire builder in my house, but we're in a crisis, you know.
But you know, it's a very contentious issue on the neighborhood blogs. So yeah, it's really contentious. Yeah.
Yes, it is. I agree.
Thanks, Marshall, for the question. And I'm putting the email address again of our chapter in the chat. If you could write to it with your name and contact, we'll forward that to Kathy, who is going to connect you with a Belmont, right? You'll do the connections.
Yeah, I can do that.
Thank you.
Wait, Ty, you are a master of making things happen.
Of chatting.
Can I just, I need to compliment you before I disappear. Wait, Ty, 2 years ago at the beginning of the year, he set up a meeting of the Bay Area chapter of Climate Reality and said, all right, what are we going to do? How are we going to make things happen? And he had over 100 people in the room, and his co-leader said, all right, this is what you're going to do. You're going to make a pledge to do something. Now sit down and figure out what it is, but you have to make a pledge, and it has to be done in 90 days. And everybody went, wow, okay. And all 100 people came up with pledges of what they were going to do. It was absolutely arbitrary, and it was nowhere near as friendly as he always is at other times, but it was very effective, and it moved us all forward.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we gotta feel that urgency that Kathy talked about, right? Sometimes you just gotta, as you said, right, Kathy? Just push the button there. All right, thank you, David. Any other last minute questions before we adjourn for the night? Fred's got a question. Go ahead, Fred.
Actually, two quick questions. First of all, what is it about ADUs that somehow stands out as an exception from regular homes? And the other one is how does an item like this get on the city council agenda to be considered? Does it take just one city council member to say, I want the city council to consider this, and let's put it on the agenda and talk about it and direct the city staff to look into it?
That was actually something that our city council had a little bit of a discussion about, because it seemed like they were kind of changing their procedures while we were in the middle of this. One council member can propose something, but it seemed like they were, I don't know exactly what their rules are. It seemed like they were a little reluctant to just have the staff do something in response to one council member. So generally what happened in our case was, I didn't go into all these details, but when they had the mini retreat in August or whatever it was, one of our council members brought up, actually we had two council members said they wanted to talk about reach codes and could we please schedule something for this. And then they finally got it. I'm trying to remember how it worked. At one point there was one member bringing it up, another time there were two. The others weren't real keen on it, and it almost died, and then they kind of pushed back a little bit, and it kind of took the council member who did think they should talk about it, it was kind of on them to persuade his or her colleagues that they should do this. And you know, if they had 2 or 3 of them saying, okay, yeah, you know, I'd be interested in it, then, you know, they could kind of get to an agreement. There was one case where I think we had, 2 or 3 of them were saying, yeah, we really think we should talk about this. And the others were like, yeah, okay, you know, they weren't going to say no, but their hearts weren't really in it. But they had to get to at least that point. To say to the staff, you know, go do it.
Here's a way to jump forward. And Kathleen, you actually mentioned this when you said, turn to the teenagers, the teenage children of the members of the council. Yeah. I have seen 3 or 4 times in the last few years of my being in the public sector, a young person coming forward with a well-organized 3-minute, not 3-minute and 5-second, not 2-minute and 45-second, but 3-minute presentation, well rehearsed, that A, starts with a thank you and with a warming up and a getting into those people in that council, and then B, this is extreme, this is the most important thing to me, and here are the 3 things that you can do. 1, 2, 3, and the council will listen. And they will change, and they will turn, and they will put it on the agenda. They won't be able to talk about it that night, but they will put it on the agenda. And the young woman who did this to us 1.5 years ago is now the chair of our Corte Madera Climate Action Committee. And she's 17.
You guys are generous. You give your public speakers 3 minutes. We only get 2 minutes with our council, so you got to be really concise. You know, we had when the council member who initially was opposed and then did the 180 and flipped, decided that he was going to make a motion to put this on the agenda. We found out that he was going to do this the morning of the meeting. He sent the 3 of us a message and said, I've decided I'm going to support reach codes, and I'm willing to make a proposal at tonight's meeting that we put this on the agenda for a subsequent meeting. And can you please get a bunch of people to show up at the council meeting and make public comments and support it? And if you do that, then it'll make it easier. I can bring it up at the very beginning of the meeting. And we were like, yeah, sure, you know. And so you know, between about 10 o'clock that morning and 7 o'clock that night when the meeting started, we managed to get 8 people together to show up at that meeting. And just in the near the beginning of the meeting, there's this open public comment session. There was nothing on the agenda that night about climate or reach codes or anything. But we used that open public comment session and just, you know, one by one, kept getting up there and saying, we really think San Carlos needs to, you know, adopt reach codes. We're in a climate crisis and yada, yada, yada. And then the council member was able to say, well, gee, there seems to be a lot of public interest in, you know, doing something about reach codes. I'd like to propose that we put that on the agenda. And, you know, it was a little bit harder for the others to say, nobody cares, because they just had 8 people come up and, you know, tell them that there was interest in it. But they still had a discussion because the mayor was kind of in that mode of, well, let's talk another time about whether we want to talk about this, and, you know, was going to defer it. And it took another council member saying, no, you know, actually, I'm getting kind of interested in this too. And, you know, it kind of pushed it along. But having people get up there and talk about it kind of gave them cover to push. Do we answer your question, Fred? Did you have another question? I'm trying to remember.
It was the ADUs. It just stood out as being an exception, and I couldn't understand why all electric didn't apply to ADUs.
Yeah, that
attached ADUs.
Yeah, attached ADUs.
Attached as opposed to unattached.
Yeah, that was a last minute addition that came up at the last meeting in January. When the staff came back to the council with a revised proposal, they said, oh, and by the way, it occurred to us after we put this together that you might also want to think about an exception for ADUs. So we didn't have any time to prepare for that one. But they did, the council talked about it, and they did decide to narrow it down to just the attached ADUs. So if you're building a separate building in your backyard, that still has to be all electric. And I think the reason they did the exception for the attached ones is, you know, if it's just a little bump out that you're doing on your house and, you know, nothing else about the house is changing, you know, I guess it didn't really seem fair to say you got to swap out all your gas appliances for electric. But if it's the way they wrote it is if that attached ADU is, you know, constructed, I guess, as part of one of these major remodels where, you know, there's a lot being done to the house anyway, then yeah, you do have to make it all electric. That was the distinction, I think. We
jurisdictions are under pressure from the state to not get in the way of ADUs.
Yeah.
You know, promote them, and make them as affordable as possible. So if somebody, let's say an older resident that's been in a 4 or 5 bedroom house wants to carve off 1 bedroom and a bath to make a JDU, I call it, a junior accessory dwelling unit within their unit, you got to give the same exception to that as to the rest of the single family home.
Yeah, exactly. The same pressure here. There's a lot of pressure on our council members to make those ADUs happen easily.
Great points.
Well,
all right. Are we, the hardcore are still here? What are you, nerds, all of you?
Yeah, I recognize a couple of nerds on this screen right here for sure. Harriet, absolutely. Harriet is a nerd. Come on, Harriet. You haven't said anything.
Right.
All right, Harriet, have the last word.
Guilty as charged. But anyway, well, it's wonderful. You know, and Kathleen, I hope you will continue to share your wonderful accomplishments with me, and I just so appreciate that you shared this with me, and that you know, this all came about as a result of you, you know, sharing your wonderful news and accomplishments. So, but I hope you won't shy away from doing that in the future, because you know, I hope you. Anyway, we appreciate you sharing your amazing accomplishment, and we just congratulate you and appreciate you making this evening available for all of us.
Thank you, Harriet. She's saying
Dave too. Thank you for your bringing in your expertise, and Wei Tai for putting together a really compelling evening.
The night we got the reach codes adopted, I sent a message to Harriet because I'd been telling her about this. Like, hey, just thought you'd like to know, we accomplished this thing that I've been talking to you about since training. And then next thing I know, she's talking to Wei Tai, and I'm hearing, hey, can you come give a presentation? So that's why she's saying this. She wants to make sure I don't never want to tell her anything again.
It sets you up. But yeah, good news is contagious, and action is contagious. And what you've done here by sharing tonight is going to probably result in more great things happening. So
that's the whole idea.
So we can all do that now.
Well said. Well said, Harriet. I knew you had it in you. Thank you, Wei Tai.
All right, we're adjourning. Thank you, everybody.
Right.
Good night. Have a good
everybody.
evening. Thank you so much for coming.
Bye.